Hey everybody, I'm Tiffany Harelik, and I'm so excited to have my friend and colleague and sister Georgia Miguez of Sister Creek Hives on the podcast today. So thank you, Georgia, for being here. I love you so much.
I love you too. Thank you for the invitation.
Georgia is a 1-3 splenic projector. She is a Sagittarius sun. And, we've done a lot of beekeeping journeys together. Georgia and I just as a personal introduction, we have always had several different friend groups that know each other. So we were always kind of in the periphery of each other through herbalism, through one of the juice companies that we have a lot of friends in common with, through different walks of life in the kind of healthcare world. But it wasn't until beekeeping that we really forged our own deep and lasting friendship and sisterhood. And so, why are we talking about beekeeping on a predominantly astrology channel? I'll just say I can't stop talking about beekeeping is one thing. If you need a little segue, Mercury is the planet that rules bees. Mercury is responsible for the hive mind. Virgo is the sign that you would associate with beekeeping. And I have a whole episode on the astrology of beekeeping that you might find interesting. So there's a Venn diagram of topics that go on with beekeeping and spirituality, mediumship, psychic work, and astrology. So I'll put that link below. But today I have Georgia on because we're going to talk about her healing journey, what brought her to beekeeping, and also solstice in the apiary. So we're recording this for solstice of 2023, but the beekeeping year is always divided into solstices. So no matter when you're listening to this, you can consider the beekeeping year is divided between when the winter solstice is and the summer solstice. So this is the journey. This is the place the story that we're walking with you today. And Georgia, if you let me actually, we were laughing about this because Georgia and I have ridden many car rides together. We've done bee removals together. We have led beekeeping clubs together. We have done a lot of different bee activities. She has seen me in some of my worst moments with my health and vice versa. There's been a lot of bonding over that. So it's kind of funny and awkward for me to read her professional bio like this, but I want to properly introduce you guys as well. So Georgia Miguez's affinity for nature began on a sprawling childhood farm where her love of the outdoors evolved into a commitment to safeguard wild spaces and explore her love of plants. Recognizing the ecological challenges faced by the Texas Hill Country, Georgia's tagline that honeybees are the gateway bug encapsulates her vision: create honeybee habitats as a catalyst for expanding sanctuaries for native pollinators. In 2019, Georgia founded Sister Creek Hives, which has become a hub for community education, providing classes to schools across the Hill Country and initiating adult classes in January of 2024. Though a leader in the community beekeeping club, Georgia prefers to be known for her local impact rather than the specific titles. Her success, gratitude, and joy in beekeeping are deeply rooted in a personal story, starting her beekeeping journey just 3 months before a breast cancer diagnosis. Through the challenge of treatment, the bees became a source of joy and healing. Today, Georgia's mission is to share her beekeeping expertise, emphasizing chemical-free and thoughtful beekeeping practices to create a harmonious coexistence between humans and the essential pollinators that contribute to the vitality of our ecosystem. And one more thing about Georgia before I turn it over, your personality sun is in gate 9, which is the gate of the small, which has to do a lot with beekeeping and in many different ways. So you're perfectly aligned. I'm grateful that you're here. And I almost started crying your bio. So let me turn it over to you for a little bit. Would you just share about your journey and how you came to bees and Sister Creek?
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you again for the invitation to be here. I'm so excited to share with your following about bees and how to weave astrology into that and spirituality into it. And the mentioning the gate of the small is actually a really great segue into saying that I really never imagined being a professional beekeeper. That wasn't something that I had any kind of goal set for myself. I actually read a book by Starhawk And some of your followers might be familiar with Starhawk. So the Fifth Sacred Thing was the book, and in that book, there's a chapter that talks about the Melissas, and they're these women that are the stewardess of bees during this dystopian time on the planet. And that chapter changed my mind about bees. It opened a door of curiosity to move away from being afraid of bees. Growing up on that farm that I grew up on, I was outside playing all of the time. I loved insects, I loved bugs, but not the stinging bugs, because I would step on them in the grass and get stung every summer, and it was always painful, right? So the curiosity that honeybees are spiritual divine creatures uh, was, awoken inside of me. And I started to save bees that I found inside and get them back outdoors. I started to let bees crawl on me if I was dining outside at a restaurant. And I decided that I wanted to try to keep bees, be a beekeeper, but a backyard beekeeper is what I was interested in. So
Beehaver,
I
we call them,
got,
right?
what's that?
Beehaver, we call them,
Yes,
right?
I wanted to be a bee haver. And about 6 years after that initial journey began, I finally got an opportunity to put bees on 20 acres out in the hill country. So
Mhm,
I ordered my hives. I did a lot of research. I found really great Texas genetics.
mhm,
And I put those bees out on the property, and that was going to be my year of the bee, and the year to just take all of the classes and delve into all of the research. However, 3 months later, I was diagnosed with a pretty aggressive form of breast cancer. So everything bee related had to stop. And I then had to become an advocate for my own health, because if anyone has gone through any kind of significant health issue, you know that there's a standard of care in the medical industry, and that if you want anything beyond the standard, then you really have to do a lot of research and advocate for yourself. So I started down that journey, and a lot of people, I reached out to some professional beekeepers that I had come across over the years, and a lot of people had the suggestion to get rid of the bees and just focus on my health. And I thought, man, no way. I waited so long for this. Why would I do that? So I took a chance and I kept the bees. I hired a beekeeper to come out in the fall just to make sure that they were going to overwinter okay. And then I just spent the winter watching them. And I went through a really difficult journey because, not just with how difficult treatments are, but COVID happened during that
mhm,
time as well. So that really compounded the fear base that cancer kind of is already rooted in.
mhm,
And I really started to spiral down during that time. So the bees were the one place where I could find joy. And I had reached a level of apathy where I really wasn't feeling much. And so it meant a lot to me that I could feel joy with the bees. And as I got my strength back over time, I was able to do some inspections. And there was this one colony, I only had two at the time. One was really, I was afraid of them. They were so like intimidating. And then the other one was really calm and very gentle. And I would do an inspection, and the bees would just stare at me from between the frames and land on me, and I never got stung by any of them. And I would finish that inspection and I would sit down, and I felt like I had just ran a marathon. Like my body was tingling, and I just felt like all of my cells were alive. And that's when I knew that bees had healing properties to them. Like bees really were these spiritual beings that I had first read about 6 years ago. And that's how it started. So I continued on with that. I found great mentors who took me under their wing, who are natural, chemical-free beekeepers, and gave me an opportunity to work in hundreds of different hives over the course of the next few years, and helped me start my business. And that's where I am today. I'm in service to the bees, I like to say.
mhm. Yeah, that's perfect. And you are, I like to get in a hurry. I like to do things quickly. And Georgia, one of the things that she's taught me by practicing together over the last couple of years is really about slow beekeeping, and going slow and not being so like anytime we work bees together now, it's like we've made a commitment to each other that it's just going to be a 4-hour situation. It might be a 15-minute situation, but we're going to plan like each colony. We're going to give it the proper time it needs, and not rush nature, you know. I want to just ask you, can you guys hear the cat? Can you hear? Okay, awesome. He's a very concerned citizen that I have let the dogs out during the podcast. In an effort to keep the dogs quiet, the cat is now taking up the space. So if you can't hear him, I'm going to go on. So in terms of healing, and healing in the apiary and the bees bringing you joy, today, what we really want to cover today not only is just the healing that you went through, but also the healing aspect of the apiary. We want to talk about some of our winter strategies and solstice in the apiary, and we want to talk about some of our beekeeper rituals that have to do with the element of fire. So kind of as a next topic, I wanted us to just introduce healing in the hive in general. So one of my, I think, favorite beekeeping fun facts is that the bees hum in the key of C, and that this hum in the key of C provides a lot of healing frequencies. We're into the solfeggio frequencies, we're into the different tones, we're into toning and healing medicine bowls and all of the chiming and the chanting and the stuff that can be done. But there's actually a lot of people that are using the bees hum in support of recovery in the veteran community, right? Have you seen some of those things? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, for PTSD. Yeah.
Yeah, for PTSD, and actual studies being done around it, not just like cool witchy woo-woo stuff, like actual medicinal, like reported studies. Of course, there's just like, of course, the medicinal honey, of course, the different products we can make. But I thought I would just ask you some of the ideas that you have around what else is healing that comes from the hive.
Yeah, absolutely. I've had a couple of people that I run into over the last few years that find out that I'm a beekeeper and express a lot of people actually have interest in becoming a beekeeper and interest in honeybees. But I think there's a lot of fear wrapped up in it for people, right? And so actually one of my intentions for accepting the invitation to the podcast today is, hopefully people are going to have their minds opened up to, some different ideas about how people can interact with honeybees and how healing they can be. But I had someone ask me one time about anxiety, and if they thought that, if someone with severe anxiety would be able to be a beekeeper. And I think absolutely. I think in the beginning, beekeeping is a hobby that requires, some patience. It's a pretty steep learning curve. But I think that when you get past that and you learn how to move around the bees and you learn how to read the bees and what's happening inside of their hive, I think that it really can be beneficial for people with anxiety, all different levels of anxiety, because it teaches you how to be present in the moment. And so much of anxiety is living in the past or living in the future, right? So I think that for anxiety healing, it can be great. The air that comes out of the hive is healing. So we know that they go and they collect tree resins and saps, and they turn that into a sticky substance that we call propolis, and they line the inside of their nest cavity or their hive with this propolis, and it is antimicrobial, antibacterial, and it's creating, medicinal air for the hive to exist in. And there's a lot of practices. It's more popular in European countries right now, but there are a few people who have brought it over to the States and have started doing it in the States, where you actually connect a tube and an oxygen mask, and you actually breathe in the hive air, and there's screens, so you're not going to suck in a bee. Yeah. accident.
Like those cool, like sauna looking places. It's not a sauna, but you essentially sleep over the hive and you're breathing in their air all night. I'm kind of like, I hope the bees don't mind, but it seems like a really interesting experience, you know?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, absolutely. And actually one more quick
yeah.
experience, firsthand experience that I've had with the healing properties of bees is that a friend of mine, she gets really bad migraines, and she was having a bad migraine the other day, and she needed some Advil. She was here at my house. So I gave her some Advil, but I said, you know what? I think that maybe let's grab a yoga mat and come lay by the hive. And I had been feeding back a little bit of honey that was still in some wax comb,
Mhm.
and it was in a little crock pot. And so I brought the crock pot over, I laid it down next to her, and the bees followed it, of course. So she's laying on the yoga mat, and she's got her little hoodie over her eyes, and she's just curled up, relaxing in the sunshine, and the bees are humming all around her. And she says, "Oh, this feels so amazing to hear the bees humming, to smell the honey, to smell the wax." And she just laid there and basically went into a trance. And I would just walk by every now and then and check on her, and there'd be bees crawling on her back and crawling on her head. And so I think that the bees can be, such a great support for humans, especially right now. Yeah.
Absolutely. You know, the medicinal honey, I just want to mention our friend Dr. Farhat Ozturk does a lot of research on medicinal honey at the University of Texas in San Antonio. So that's a whole other episode that we could just dive deep into how truly medicinal, raw, organic, treatment-free honey is, and you can use it in many different capacities, of course. Not just eating it, but also beauty products, cosmetics. One of my favorite products I made this year was a black salve. And so I had happened, we have a huge plantain like forest out here. And so I had happened to have dried some plantain during the summer solstice. And so I had this solar powered plantain previously dried that I was soaking in some olive oil. And I used that along with some coconut, charcoal, activated charcoal from coconut, and a couple of other things, plus beeswax, and created a drawing salve. So the arts and crafts portion of like healing from the hive is endless. Um, and then, okay, that leads us kind of into this solstice in the apiary. So we were talking about this. We're talking about this now because we're recording during a solstice season. And so, you know, one of the things that I was really fascinated to learn about, you know, if you're not like studying bees, you kind of think like they're just around all the time, or maybe you see them more during the summer and the spring because stuff's blooming. But their actual physiology changes, their needs change. They're essentially two separate castes that develop of bees. And so, you know, their whole system of their life revolves around the sun in many ways. And so, as the sun moves into Capricorn, we've got this. The beekeeping year is just divided into these two phases. And so, as the sun moves into, as we move into the winter solstice, we're actually in a season of increase when this light is returning, when the days are getting longer. And late spring and summer is when the colony is the biggest. Like we have the most amount of bees in the summer. And then as the light gets shorter and shorter, so does the colony. So we're kind of at a bee new year right now. And so I wondered if we could just talk about that for a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. And real quick, I just want to, since we're talking to a group of people that aren't really so familiar with bees as they are
Yeah.
astrology, I just want to say that when we talk about chemical free or treatment free, what that means is that most beekeepers are using some type of chemical treatments inside of the hive
Mhm.
in order to try to knock back some of the hive pests that are giving honeybees a hard time. So the main one is the varroa mite that feeds on the fat bodies of the bees. And I would say, it's definitely the majority of beekeepers that are using chemical treatments. Now, the issue with that is that those chemicals do have a negative impact on the health, the longevity of the individual bees that are living in that colony. So it's going to affect the colony as a whole over time. And then the other thing too is that the wax is going to absorb those chemicals and it's going to hold those chemicals because the wax is acting as a filtration system for the colony, like our lymphatic system is a filtration system for our bodies.
Mhm.
So that's why it's important that we are talking about our chemical free and treatment free kind of approach. And I
Yeah,
just want
everything's
to
healing in the
understand
hive as
that.
long as
Yeah.
there's no
As
pharmaceutical.
long as there's no chemicals stored in it, right? Yeah.
I'm glad you said that because my aunt this morning, she was like, will you teach me how to read a label with the honey? Because I'm not sure if what I'm getting from the store, like, what is the label? What do I need to be looking for? And I'm like, well, it's really simple. There are no laws in
Right.
labeling honey. And so whatever is being said on the label is not necessarily true, fortunately. Unfortunately. So if you know your beekeeper, if you're buying from somebody who's selling like at a farmer's market, if you're buying from somebody that has the stamp of real Texas honey, if you're buying like beeswax products, but they're full of chemicals, like what good are you really doing? So this is where small batch, knowing your beekeeper, knowing what's going into it, it's like it's not an impossible egg to crack. It's just being really mindful about what you're putting in your body. Um,
Absolutely. Or being your own beekeeper. It's kind of the same way for herbalism, right? Is that, herbalism is the earth's medicine. It's available to all of us. Any of us can grow a couple of medicinal plants in our backyard or harvest a few medicinal plants that we can identify in the wild. And it's the same thing with beekeeping, right? You can have a couple of hives in your backyard without having a detrimental ecological effect on, native pollinators. So,
right.
yeah.
So everybody be a beekeeper. It would be so cool, right? I got into beekeeping from gardening, so I love that you said that.
Yeah.
But okay, so
Okay.
now let's shift gears into
Solstice in the
solstice.
in the apiary. That's right. Yeah. Yeah. So as you were saying, it is incredibly counterintuitive to think about bees expanding in the winter time. And in fact, a lot of the information about beekeeping that you find on the internet is really going to be written to indicate the opposite because as beekeepers, we are winding down during that time. As humans, we're going inward and the bees already started doing that. So it's not that there's this huge expansion that happens in winter.
Yeah.
So it makes sense, right? That from a human perspective, we're going to observe bees and think that they're in the same state of going inward as we are. But that's not the case. The bees are indeed slowly over time going to be building back up so
Yeah.
that, by the time we are coming out of winter, they're ramped and ready to go. And I like to explain it because a lot of chicken people will understand it, right?
All right.
Same way with like chickens laying eggs. It's like
Yeah.
as the day dwindles, the daylight hours dwindle, you get less and less eggs. And then after the solstice, when the light is increasing, then they're responding to that light increase and they're starting to lay again. And it's the same thing for the queen, right? So
Right.
she's laying eggs and she's going to be dwindling down as the daylight hours decrease and ramping back up. Now, there's a lot of other stuff going on in the hive too. So
Mhm.
you have, your female bees, and this is a maternal society, right? So we have the queen who is really the mother of the hive. So that's kind of a interesting, like, colonial term. And actually, the original thought was that it was like the king of the hive.
Right.
you know so we at least progressed to identifying that it was a female that was responsible for making sure that the colony was staying alive, but we can think of her as the mother too. And so she's the one that's laying the eggs, but the daughters of the hive are doing a lot to actually control when she lays and what type of eggs that she lays. If she's going to lay fertilized female eggs or if she's going to lay unfertilized male eggs. It's the daughters of the queen or the mother that are making those determinations. So it's also kind of, a outdated idea to think that the queen rules the hive like we think of, a monarchy. So
Right. Yeah. She's not making all the decisions. She's just the daughters are saying, lay here, Ma. And she's like, all right, ladies, you know.
Right.
She always has attendants, of course, helping her and making sure that she's supported in her role. But this is the time of year where they're guiding her to start the egg laying process again. You know, I think it's really important too to talk about, like, you might not want to be a beekeeper, but you might want to support the bees. And the way that you support the bees during this time of year, at least in our hemisphere, we practice beekeeping in Texas and in the United States. And so for us, at the time of the winter solstice, when the sun is in Capricorn, it's colder. It's supposed to be colder. I had on a tank top a couple days ago. But when it's colder, you want to think about what can they forage. So the bees aren't out flying if it's cold and rainy and windy, right? But if they have a nice day where it gets above 55, they might go explore and try to see something that's flowering and maybe bring back some pollen at some point. And so one of the best things you can do to support bees, whether you're a keeper or not, or a haver or not, is to make sure that you have forage that there's flowers all year long. And so the stuff that flowers for us this time of year is going to be things like rosemary and thyme. We have a ton of mistletoe on my property. We have a ton of dandelion on my property. A lot of the city bees rely on henbit, so to not mow when you start seeing the henbit and the dandelion pop up, and let the pollinators. It's almost like you were on an intermittent fast, and you were like hanging there for 6 o'clock, and then 6 o'clock came around, and there's like a dinner plate in front of you, and somebody just took it away. You're like, okay, I think I can go a little bit longer, but it's not ideal. So I wanted to ask you more about mistletoe because we have a group chat going with some members of our beekeeping community, and I didn't know that mistletoe was a big forage thing. So
Yeah.
you had said, yeah, it is. And I mean, I'm not like chopping down mistletoe, but we have a lot out here. So I thought, like, well, yay, nature knows what to do, huh?
Yeah, nature knows what to do, and that's an early spring, one of the earliest spring forage nectar sources for
Mm-hmm.
the bees. So yeah, mistletoe is definitely something that the bees are relying on. And the agarita is another one if you live in
Yeah.
Texas, you know,
Yeah.
and that's one that a lot of people, just because it's prickly, a lot of people don't have love for agarita or don't have love for thistles because they're prickly, but you know, those are both going to be really great nectar sources for not just our honeybees but our native bees too. And that's why I like to say that honeybees are the gateway bug, because honeybees get all of the recognition in media, and there's, you know, the Save the Bees campaign, and somehow honeybees got all of the glory in that campaign. But really, you know, our native bees, there are 20,000 native bee species around the world. And, you know, they are going to have co-evolved with a lot of the native plants in your region where you live,
Right.
meaning that they really rely on those native plants, even more so typically than the honeybees, because the honeybees are going to, you know, go for really large forage areas. So if there's any kind of blooming crop nearby, like alfalfa, clover, you know, canola, those kinds of things, the honeybees are going to really be drawn to those types of plants, where your native bees are going to be drawn more to your native plants. So you can support honeybees and native pollinators by having those native plants around.
And to kind of zoom out from what you're saying, honeybees, Apis mellifera, are European, right? They came
Right.
over to this continent where we practice in the late 1600s. And so they're not, I mean, and some of them came up through South America too. Like but they're not native essentially. And so, there's this opportunity, I guess, to understand more about the history of the bees, and that they're the ones that are coming that are not native. They still have had several hundred years to evolve, and the main point really is that you've got to keep forage up year round, and that you've got to keep water sources up year round for your local girls and your immigrant girls, basically. So
Yeah, absolutely. And water is not something that people tend to think about when they think about how they can support just their, you know, local honeybees, whether
Mhm.
they're native or feral, and bees need water. You know,
Right.
all living things need water.
Yeah.
So having a water source set up in your yard that is reliable, your birds are going to come for that. Your natives are going to come for that. Your girls that have come over, European honeybees are going to come to that. So yeah. And
Yep.
that's year round. I mean, I find bees still foraging water even though it's cold here.
Right. Yeah. Right. So me too. I wanted to mention a couple other things, like the bees when they are in their colonies for the winter and they're all snuggled up, but they're not hibernating. But they are forming a cluster. And so they're trying to keep warm. They're trying to keep at a certain body temperature, and they'll vibrate, they'll do their wings, they're able to keep warm. Georgia mentioned earlier the propolis seal that is made. And so if you are a curious beekeeper or beehaver and you're poking around in your hive and opening the seal, you're creating airways and making it more difficult for them to just do what they know how to do. So some beekeepers have like those heat seeking, like they can like detect things through different cameras. Is there a hive in there? Is there not? There's other more kind of folkloric ways to know if your hive is alive in there or not. A lot of people, when we have bad weather, want to go check on their hives and peek in there, and it's really one of the worst things that you can do for them, because you just screwed their airflow and their temperature, right? And they can't really go out and get more propolis at that moment, so they're just dealing with what they have. There's a lot of education in beekeeping in terms of I don't know, like I'm just gonna pause myself because it's that whole topic of letting the airflow and screwing up their temperature. I just have a huge beef against horse blankets too. So like horses and dogs, like they poof out. They can maintain their heat. But if you put a blanket on their poof, on their fur, you're squishing the airflow. And I know that that's a very controversial topic, as is beekeeping. You can ask 5 beekeepers and you're going to get 10 different responses. And most of them are going to say it depends. And I remember, Georgia was really ahead of me on the beekeeping journey. So I'm always looking up to her. And I remember really early on, I was asking her, like, I thought that things happened in a certain way and you could just learn those ways and you'd be fine. And so every time she would say, like, well, you're going to find your way. And I was like, what? Isn't there a way for me to follow? you know? And she's
Yeah,
like,
if you're a perfectionist, beekeeping is really hard.
it is, because so
Yeah,
much depends, you
yeah.
know?
There's
But
not a one size fits all, that's for sure. You know, every colony has its own way of doing things
yeah,
too. So
right,
that's also part of that. You'll find your way. You'll find your way with your colonies.
right.
They're not reading books and they're not watching YouTube. And if they were, they would, be laughing at us silly humans for thinking that we know so much.
I love that you brought that up. I think one of the coolest ways that the hive expresses its personality is with the the what are they called? The death bees, the ones that take care of the dead. The
Undertakers.
Undertaker, the Undertaker bees. So all of the bees have a different job performance. It changes as they get older. But at some level, they get to practice being the Undertaker, and they do it differently. So some Undertaker bees line all the dead bees up and do it this way. Some Undertaker bees kick them out, flip them out, do nothing. So they just have a different personality in the way that they take care of their dead. Bees die in the hive, and when they are sick or when they know that they are of detriment to the whole, they will remove themselves from the hive too. This time of year, you might see a lot of bee poop on the outside of your hives when because they are not making their cleansing flights, as we call them. So if at one point they've been cooped in because there's been a lot of rain and a lot of whatever, maybe snow, maybe
Oh,
ice,
yeah.
right? They're at one point they're going to get out and need to quickly make their cleansing flight, like whew, get that, because they don't want to dirty the hive, the colony that they're living in. But it's nuanced because sometimes bees have a disease called nosema, right? And so sometimes a characteristic of nosema is a lot of bee diarrhea. So there's a lot of situations that it depends, And I'm so grateful to you, Georgia, for helping me find my way, having to do, with natural beekeeping. And I just, there's not, it's these type of conversations aren't very prevalent, or they weren't when I was at least starting beekeeping in our area. And so to find people that are doing natural beekeeping to the best of their ability, right? Sometimes there's, again, different nuances for different reasons, and there's no judgment. It's just to the best of their ability. And so I definitely want to acknowledge our teacher, Les Crowder. He has a wonderful book called Top Bar Beekeeping. And so if anybody's like, oh my God, I don't know where to start, that's a place. That's one place. Because we're talking about solstice in the apiary, I love the book that you showed me called Song of Increase, right? Song of Increase is a really nice kind of a witchy take on beekeeping that I love. With Jacqueline, who is the author, and she just is a very
Yeah.
well written, beautiful
Yeah,
book.
she's a biodynamic beekeeper and did a lot of meditations with her hives, with her bees, her colonies, and wrote down the messages that she was intuiting from the bees, and then published those in her book Song of Increase. And that's actually one of the things that I would do when I was going through treatment and I didn't have the strength or the energy to do hive inspections. I would actually just pull up a chair, and this is a great way for a lot of beekeepers to start too. Just pull up a chair and just sit kind of a safe distance from the entrance of your hive, because you're going to have, they're guarding their home space. So you're going to have guards. That's one of the other job roles that the bees will go through as they are aging. And so you don't want to be right in front of the hive, but just, a few feet away, kind of off to the side. And I would sit and I would read Jacqueline's book to the bees, and
Aw,
especially the messages from the bees. And I'd ask them, hey, do you guys agree with that? Do you think that's right?
so cute. I love one of the things that I took away from that book was she calls the drones, so the male bees, the bee boys, she calls them the shamans.
Yeah.
And this was a huge turning point in my ideas around it, because the biological, like the normal standard beekeeping education in the science world is that the boy bees are really largely unnecessary. They're only here for mating. For those of you that don't know, the queen goes on one mating flight and she'll mate with 12, 13, I don't know, 50, they don't tell us, bees up there in the sky, right? And at that moment, the boy bee dies in this act. And so it's largely perhaps misconveyed in the world of beekeeping that the male bees only have one role, and that is it. And the way that Jacqueline introduces them as the shamans of the hive that are drumming with their feet as the baby bees are born so that they have the perfect vibration to come into this world, it's just such a different, puts you in a different mojo, Uh,
And when you think about how healing the entire hive is, that every aspect of bee life is, for the greater good of the whole. They're a
yeah.
super organism, right? And so they don't live for their individual existence. Their individual existence is going to be, brought together for the greater good of the colony as a whole. And when you think about it from that perspective, it makes sense, right? That the
Yeah.
male bees are going to have a much more important and vital role than just sperm donors, and it's one of the reasons why, I don't know if you remember this, but it was during one of the removals that we did. And at the end, I said, you know what? Removals are so tough, because in the beginning, when I'm invited to do a removal of a honeybee nest that's in an area where they're unwanted, they're going to be killed. The humans are going to come in and they're going to poison them if somebody doesn't come in and remove them and give them a safe space. When I get those kinds of invitations and I can be that person that can go and collect them and give them a safe place, I feel so charged. I'm so excited, and I feel like I'm going in as a superhero. And then by the end of the removal, I feel terrible
Right.
because I'm watching these baby, and it's the part that gets me is watching these baby bees as they emerge into chaos,
Yeah.
that that is not at all the natural order for them.
Yeah.
That's when it really starts to sink in for me that like, oh gosh, I really wish that we could just leave them where they are, you know? And
Yeah.
if you have bee trees, you know, there's no reason to think that having a colony removed from a tree where they have a nest, that it's going to benefit them in any way to be removed from that. If they can safely stay in that place, please consider leaving them, because
Yeah.
that is the, you know, being inside the trunk of a tree is really like the glory for a bee. That's one of the best spots that they could
That's the
nest.
dream. That's the bee dream.
Yeah. But you know, talking about solstice in the apiary too, there's another thing that I want to mention for beekeepers, especially if you're new to beekeeping. And, you know, it is certainly just inevitable that you're going to worry about your bees during winter. And so, a way to check on your bees during the cold months without breaking those propolis seals,
Mhm.
and this is a really great practice to have year round, is to watch the entrance of your hives and then to also check the ground in front of your hives as well. And so what you'll notice, and especially if you kind of keep the area in front of your hive, the ground in front of your hive tidy, what
Mhm.
you'll notice is dead bees that get kicked out after they have been cooped up because of a you know, cold spell that came through, snow or rain or whatever it was that kept them stuck inside of the hive. They're going to do that cleaning out, that undertaking that Tiffany was talking about. So if you go and you check and you kind of, you know, keep the grass kind of low in front of the hive, and, you know, every time that you go and you look and you kind of rake the dead bees away, then you'll see when more get, you know, placed down there. And that's a good indication that you have living bees still inside of your hive because they're doing that undertaking work. And then, of course, you can watch the entrance too to see if they're flying. But
Right, right. There's that too.
yeah,
Uh,
and it'll give you a really good indication too if anything is really wrong with your hive. If you have been watching the ground in front of your hive and you see what kind of the normal die off rate is, and then one day you go and you look in front of your hive and there's a lot of dead bees out there, you know that you've got something going on. So
yeah.
without even opening your hive, you figured that out.
Right. Yes. Yeah, and just to be really aware of your surroundings while you're checking your bees too. In the winter, which for us is cold, sometimes mice will try to get into the hives, right? And so they're like where I live, where there's mice, there's snakes. And so I have on more than two occasions gone down to check bees and been like, okay, the snakes are hunting the mice are trying to get warm in the beehive. And the bees will actually propolize mice. They'll actually entomb these little tiny mice. It's really weird. There's this whole world of beekeeping that it's this whole other little secret society that's going on while we're living our lives out here. I want to shift topics a little bit because we're talking about the return of the light with solstice. And George and I were just kind of talking about solar powered bees, how bees are solar powered, how they follow the sun, how they use the sun as their compass for flying. They use the sun as their compass for communicating. You guys may know that the bees, of course, they do the waggle dance. They communicate through pheromones, through different ways of producing different scents. But they also use the sun and the angle of the sun to say, hey, flowers over here, fly at this angle according to this time of day. They're really sensitive to the Earth's magnetic field. And one of the lectures that our teacher Les gives is on the consciousness of flowers and how they're sensitive. You know, not only are the bees sensitive to the sun, but the flowers are too, right? They're kind of following the light around, and they're blooming, of course, based on the amount of sunlight that is present. So we can save the consciousness of flowers. We'll kind of let that be a teaser, and I think maybe Georgia and I will do that one another time. But you know, the sun, it's also an anti-pathogen. So there's a lot of content in like early beekeeping. It's like put your colony in full sun. And so I did that. I experimented with that because the sun does help with anti-pathogens. Or is anti-pathogenic? Is that a word, guys? I don't know.
It can
Uh,
be.
you. Thank you. But the sun is intended to keep the hive strong and healthy. That's not necessarily the case in Texas when we have 90 days of 110-degree weather. So I adapted. And so my colonies are now in tree lines, part shade. And I find that in my area, they do better. But I think it's worth noting that there's a lot of sun and solar lore and tidbits that helps beekeepers find their way to communicate, the language of the bees. They fly during the day, they're active during the day, they're dormant at night. That's a sun thing. Um, another thing that Georgia taught me that is known in beekeeping has to do with the direction that you put your hive. And so the hives want to face southeast because they want to rise with the sun, and they get their game on early, right? The sun's up, flowers are blooming, we're going to get out. So any of that you want to speak to or add to or share?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, there's a lot of bee removers who have noted that when they go in to remove feral colonies, the colony entrance is typically facing south or southeast.
Mhm.
And, another thought on that is that you have the prevailing north winds, right, that are bringing in the coldest air. And so honeybees are masters of airflow, kind of going back to what Tiffany was saying before about getting in during the cold season and breaking the propolis seal that the bees have, built up. That propolis is really hard, and they have to warm it up actually in order to be able to really reuse it and be able to seal their seals again. And they will actually open up areas that they do have sealed when it is time to let more airflow in. And, so it's important to, I think, really learn as much as you can from the bees. And that's where, our ancestors who were starting off more with like collecting wild swarms or doing removals from areas, were really getting to observe bees in their natural setting, in their naturalist setting, and able to, kind of modify their beekeeping management practices based on that. And that's a lot, I think, of what slow beekeeping and natural beekeeping is learning from the bees. And, think more like a bee than like a human, because, we've come up with all these kinds of, gadgets and gizmos. We've got these screen bottom boards that everybody, was a huge proponent of for a long time. And a screen bottom board is like having the AC running in your house and then opening all your windows and your screen doors closed, but everything else is open. Like, what sense does that make, right? So
Mhm.
the bees can they do evaporative cooling. They're able to pool water
Mhm.
into the hive in certain areas, fan it with their wings, and create evaporative cooling effects. And, when they're able to build natural comb, they're shaping and forming their comb in a way that allows air to be able to move through the inside of the hive the way that they have evolved to move it. So yeah. And then, the aspect of the sun is just so fascinating. I mean, just to give you an example of how intricately bees have worked with the sun for millions of years. By the way, bees have been on the planet for about 120 million years. They evolved from wasp, and as plants started flowering and attracting insects to those flowers in order to increase plant pollination, the honeybees evolved from wasp to collect the nectar and the pollen. So they've been around for a really long time, and they actually have special eyes on the top of their head. So the compound eyes are the two big eyes on the front of the head that we can see with our naked eye. And usually you have to, be really up close to a bee, or you have to see it in kind of a macro photo where you have the little small oxyli, which is on top of the head. And that's the eye that they're using to determine where the sun is on the horizon of the earth. And so they're having to constantly communicate with each other, because if a bee comes through, and says where the big patch of flowers is, and 2 or 3 hours go by, there's got to be another bee that's communicating where that patch is, because the sun on the horizon has changed now. And so they're constantly sending out scouts. They have bees that are, just specialty scout bees that are going out and finding these resources and coming back and communicating through dance language and sending out bees. And I was just listening to another podcast recently, Tiffany, and it really made me laugh because they were talking about, gardeners, and people get so excited when they go, oh, I planted a garden for the bees. And, what's really cute about that is that the honeybees especially are again going for the big forage, the field of flowers. They want the prairie, right? Or they want the
Right.
tree that has like
Tree.
hundreds of blossoms on it, right? And
Yes.
so the bee that comes back and is like, hey, there's a cucumber over there. Like,
Guys, cucumber, she's gonna make pickles. We gotta go.
right. Right. Yeah, like you might see a few bees, in your garden, but those bees are not, they're getting laughed out of the hive. They're not recruiting a big, forage force to come, and you're not going to have, thousands of bees in your garden flower, pollinating. They're going to be out where the big buffet is. So
Right, which brings another point. Like if you like bees don't pollinate all of the stuff in our garden. A lot of the
right.
stuff in our garden is wind pollinated.
Wind
And
pollinated or pollinated by other native bees like bumblebees. Yeah.
right,
So
like I was shocked when I learned that bees didn't pollinate my tomatoes.
yeah.
There's a really
Yeah.
good book that helps that subject called Native Bees, if you're interested in that one too. So lots of good little resources out there. I want to switch us to some of the bees. So this is kind of the last topic that I wanted to cover today. It's more of the rituals of the beekeeper, and we're going to talk about the element of fire. So beekeeper rituals with the element of fire. I'm going to have Georgia back on to do the other elements, but just a little housekeeping before we talk about rituals and fire in the apiary. I want to make sure that you guys know that you can find Georgia at sistercreekhives.com. She has a fun Instagram account. She's on Facebook. She has a newsletter. Make sure you sign up so that you can get information about her classes. So she does teach in person in our area, and I know that she's got some classes coming up here in January of 2024, but you may be listening to this later. So just make sure that you're following Sister Creek Hives to continue to learn about beekeeping or to become a beekeeper or just to, support the ecology in general. So I want to put that there. I'll probably say it again later, but before we close today, the whole thing is like my favorite topic. Everything's my favorite topic with bees. But I thought that because the sun and we're in the winter solstice, this return to light, that we're representing the element of fire. And so I started asking Georgia, like, how do we use fire in the apiary? So for me, some of the things that I was listing, it's like, okay, yeah, bees communicate through pheromones and dancing we've been talking about. So beekeepers use smoke and veils to keep themselves safe. So I'm definitely on the side of beekeeping, like always wear your veil. There's a lot of people in natural beekeeping that you'll see that don't wear gloves. And sometimes, like Les says, that keeps you honest, right? Because you're going to move slower if you might get stung, actually. And so choose your own risk with what you put on your body and your protective gear. But if you're with me and my lineage, we are veil wearers. So wear veils. I have seen it go south when you don't have a veil on. It can be very dangerous very quickly. So veils and smoke. So smoke is part of the element of fire. Smoke interrupts some of the pheromones that the bees are exchanging. So it kind of interrupts this communication process. And that keeps you, the beekeeper, safe, that they're not necessarily able to convey, hey, there's an intruder here at this time, or they're conveying it, but the smoke's disrupting it in some way. Now, we don't overuse smoke. So if you're out there watching beekeeping YouTube, there's a lot of people that just pour smoke into it. That hurts the bees. And so as you're approaching the hive, you can do a little puff, puff, puff in the entrance, and that's it. And then as you open the top and you're starting to get in somewhere and work, you can do another little puff, puff, like lift up, do a little puff, and that's it. And you can start to work, and the smoke will be all around you and you'll be enjoying it. And one of the first times I had Georgia out to my property, she brought some freaking frankincense resin, and I was like, what kind of beekeeping are you into? Because I am about that. So we had all of this like witchy herbal stuff, and I started like drying bee balm, which we found out is not so great in the smoker, but had to do the experiment and find out. I, of course, dried sage, dried pignon. The bees do not care, but it's fun and it's ritual and it makes it more fun for me. I have like a wreath that I made out of cotton. So we have a cotton field nearby. And cotton that will absolutely ignite and burn quickly, but then you need something else in your smoker to get it going. So the first dose of that smoke, it's going to the guardian bees that are right at the entrance, and they're at the door of the hive. And so that next dose is really about the girls on top that might be realizing that the hive is being quote unquote invaded or caretaken. The other thing that smoke does is that in the event of a sting, okay, probably going to get stung at some point in the apiary, you want to like scrape it out, get the stinger out, because it's going to keep pumping not only you full of owie, but it's also going to keep pumping pheromone out and create alarm pheromone where all of the girls are then like, attack, we know what to do. So you want to get that stinger out as quickly as possible, and then you want to put a little smoke over it. It's not going to help your sting, but it's going to stop creating that alarm pheromone from going out and amplifying a situation. So smoke and fire in the hive. The ancient Egyptian beekeepers absolutely used incense to smoke in the hive, so they must have known something about that as well. There's an effort to incorporate fire as an offering for peaceful communication. So the idea that we're talking about all of these other, dried cedar that Georgia and I have used out here. And I think it's kind of funny to bring up recycled like manure. So we call it barnyard out here. And I'll go down the street or into the field and get some barnyard, some cow manure. All of that is assimilated, digested, dried local plants, and it burns really well and it burns really cool and it creates an awesome smoke in your smoker. So there's that. And then Georgia has this amazing idea about fire in the apiary and the element of fire. And so I wanted to, if you wanted to add anything to that, but I know that you also have a cool topic here too.
Yeah, I have a solar wax melter that was built by one of the guys in our local beekeeping club. And it's a wooden box that has a glass panel over the top of it. And you put a couple of metal pans inside of the wooden box. So we've got one flat cookie sheet that has a hole drilled into one corner. We've got a couple of wooden blocks sitting underneath that. So it sits kind of down at an angle to one side.
Yep.
And then we have a little metal bread pan underneath that that has water in it. And what happens is when you are collecting wax from the hive, you can take that wax and place it into that cookie sheet, close up the solar wax melter. The sun goes through that glass panel and heats up the inside of the wooden box, heats up the metal pans, and melts that wax. And as it melts, it drips into the bread pan underneath. And once it hits the water, it starts to solidify again. And that's how you can get your nice block of solidified wax that floats to the top of the water. And the very first batch of wax that I melted, I went to collect it the next day. I waited for the wax to settle and congeal again overnight. And when I went to remove it, it had dried in this kind of flat, sort of surface. But then as the wax kind of built up in the water, it reduced the surface area, right? And so then the last bit of the wax to melt and to drip from the cookie sheet kind of dripped down the side of the bread pan. So I removed this big chunk and it looked like a tapered candle sitting on a shelf of wax. And it even had the flame, as I had pulled it off the side of the bread pan, like this very little thin piece that was in the exact shape of a flame connected to the top of that little tapered candle. And I just thought, this is perfect. Like this wax wants to be a candle. It wants to be like reincorporated to, be the light again. And so what's really fun is to think about how the sun is playing such an integral role in the bee's life. So not only are the bees, their increase and decrease in colony size is affected by the daylight hours that the sun is providing, but you also have, like you said, the flowers that are responding to the sunlight hours. The bees are flying through the air, they're navigating by the sun, and then the wax that they're building is, all in the attempt to store what they're getting from the flowers. That's why they build wax, right? So
Yeah.
they're going to lay their eggs into that, and they're also going to store the pollen from the flowers, store the nectar from the flowers, and then you melt that down, and it's so wonderful to turn it into a candle, and then all of a sudden it becomes the light again, and that's, the light that guides us through the darkness, through, the darkness for our own selves internally, just what a candle can do for soothing our emotions. It's guiding us through the night. It's guiding us through our winter, through our winter solstice. And so I just think that, especially on winter solstice, the actual practice of winter solstice, it's so nice to have a beeswax candle that you're going to light in honor of the bees through that darkest night of the year. And to watch the wax melt, it's such a wonderful thing. I hope that everyone who is a beekeeper, decides to have a little solar wax melter in their yard, because that's another aspect of slow beekeeping. Like, you can certainly go and just, like, fill a huge, stock pot full of water and wax and melt it all down with propane, and you can just, turn through it real quick and turn it into whatever you want. But there's something nice about having little rituals, just like the bees do, and the solar wax melter that I have is sitting, like, right in the middle of my apiary too,
And
and
it smells good, and it's like you can just chunk a little bit of wax in there when you have it. It can kind of cook all, like, for a while. Like, you don't have to
yeah,
deal with it until it's full. I still use a crock pot. and,
yeah.
and it's like I have two going on my porch right now, and it's a similar process. But I mean, I think we should just, like, end there. Like, that was like chef's kiss. Like, yes, to the candles, and the way that you wrap that all together was just so poetic and beautiful, and makes me want to go use my wax. And
Light a
I
candle.
yeah, light a candle, light a beeswax candle. I have one from Hunter's Hive right now that it's the Allure scent. And I was like, for this morning, like, I've been recording podcasts all day today, and I had that candle going. And for a while I was like, dang, Tiff, you really smell good today. Like, is it this going on? Like, my hair? And I was like, oh my God, I lit the candle and forgot about it because it lives in my bookshelf. But the smell of, like, a real beeswax candle with no treatment, no chemicals, it's like heavenly to work with that smell. Um, it's so beautifully said. I just want to thank you again. Guys, you can find Georgia at Sister Creek Hives, and she's going to come back. I have some really cool old footage that we should, like, loop back around and show you of some of the removals we've done. Like, last couple of years, we did a dog house removal. We did a horse barn removal. We removed bees from a bucket from one of my neighbors, a metal bucket. I still have the metal bucket. But beekeeping is it's just kind of like becoming a gardener. It's just part of your lifestyle. It's part of my lifestyle now. And I'm so grateful to you for helping me find my way and being a sister in this lineage, that we've studied from some really great people. And there's, I just am excited to see what this season holds for us. So thank you again for hanging out, Georgia. And proud to share you with the community.
Thank you. Yeah. And I hope that anyone listening who's interested in honeybees, please do go find me, sign up for the newsletter. Feel free to message me on Instagram. Tiffany will tell you, I love to talk about bees. Anytime I'm at any kind of function and people get me started, and then I look around the room and I realize I've been talking for way too long, I go, okay, just don't get me started, because I'll just talk the
No,
whole time.
it's great. It's great. I mean, you're such a good bee educator of bees, and there's so much to talk about. I think that's, like, what's so weird. Like, you think, like, oh, it's just beekeeping, like, you'll just learn it, or that's what I thought. I'm like, oh, you'll just pick it up. Like, no, it requires opening hundreds of hives over many seasons of different circumstances to really understand what's going on in there and to see how you want to manage, if at all. You know, there's some beekeepers that don't manage, that just let the bees do their thing out there. But yeah, this has been an awesome episode. I really appreciate you. I love you. And guys, happy winter solstice and namaste. Thank you.
Happy solstice.